Okay, testing. Am I on yet? Yeah. Testing, testing. No, I don't think I have a pretty loud voice. If it doesn't call, I don't think it's on.
I thought I just changed the batteries on that one last week.
Testing, testing. No, I don't think I'm on. Yeah. Testing.
I forgot to turn on this.
Mm-hmm. Testing, testing. Okay. Ready to go. Okay. Welcome. Good evening, everyone, to the second of 5 classes in the Discovering Buddhism module, taking refuge in the 3 jewels. This is the second of 5 classes. Let's see, do we have anyone here tonight who wasn't here last week? Okay, number of people. Okay, glad to have you. We'll do a little bit of a review. I think you'll be able to jump in. Do you have anyone who was here last week who's not here tonight? If anybody can answer that question, they're far more enlightened than the rest of us. Okay. Did you have any announcements, Linda? Okay. Well, we just had a class on safety yesterday for those of us who are leading events here at the center, and I just wanted to mention a few things that we should be announced at the beginning of every class, but we don't. In case of a fire or any kind of emergency like that, there are 3 exits to this room. One there, and then this door here is unlocked, so you can just go outside the nearest door. And then there's a gathering place on the far side of the parking lot near the road where everybody should gather if we have to leave suddenly because of a fire or something. Also, as people know, there's a lot of talk about viruses and stuff going on. If you are sick, don't feel obliged to come to class because these are being streamed, so you can listen to the class that way. If you have a little bit of a cough but without a fever, it's fine to come. But certainly remember to cough into your elbow. And then we all need to get in the habit, of which I'm terrible about, of not shaking hands for a little while, at least bumping elbows or just smiling. And then as much as possible, try and keep our hands away from what people call the T-zone, our eyes, nose, and mouth, which is really tough to remember. So, let's see, tonight we'll begin with some prayers as usual. The Gold Prayer Book, page 34. We'll read Taking Refuge and Generating Bodhicitta 3 times. We'll read the 4 Immeasurables, 7-Limb Prayer, and the Mandala Offering. And we'll do all those in English. How many people know how to make the Mandala Mudra with their hands? A couple people do. Okay. Let's. Why don't those people who know how to do it walk around and help people? You can't touch their hands, though, since we're all cesspools in this day and age. The main point is you take your ring fingers and put them together, pointing up, and then you cross your middle fingers, then use your index fingers to pull the middle fingers down, and you cross your pinkies and use your thumbs to pull them down. So what you're representing is Mount Meru in the center, which is center of the universe in the Buddhist cosmology, and then the 4 continents around it. Yeah. Cross middle fingers, then, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, ring fingers up, yeah. Here. Can you turn around and show her behind you also? Yeah. Okay, and then once you're into it, you got to figure how to get out of it without breaking a finger. And at the end of the mandala offering, we're visualizing, this is representing the universe and everything wonderful, and we're visualizing it, we're offering it to the enlightened beings. Just we're imagining that we're offering it, and then we dissolve it, we bring it down towards us and separate our hands and go back like this. As we say the mantra at the end, Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay. Not required to do the hand mudra, but people are interested in it. It does take a little bit of practice. Okay, we'll begin with taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. And just touch my nose there. Yeah. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice in giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body's speech. Clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulate since beginningless time of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma, my own merits and those of all others, to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, and for continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Okay, so we say those prayers to help set our motivation and prepare our mind for the discussion that are to follow. It's kind of like tilling the field before we plant the seeds so that they actually take root and don't fall on hard, barren ground. And now we'll begin with some meditation. We started this last week. Okay. So we'll begin by checking our posture. Our back is a little bit straighter than we normally sit. Not rigid, but said to be a regal pose, like a king or a queen. Our head is maybe just a couple degrees in front of the vertical, but not tilted to one side or the other. Our eyes are either just slightly open, letting in a little light, or lightly closed. Our mouth is lightly closed, not clenched. Our tongue is on the roof of our mouth. Our shoulders are down and a little bit back so that our chest is opened up. Upper arms are away from our torso, and we put our right hand on left, symbolizing the union of wisdom and compassion that is enlightenment, with our thumbs touching just slightly below our navel. Our legs are in a position that we find stable and non-distracting. If we're sitting in a chair, our feet are flat on the floor. It's fine to place a cushion underneath your feet. If we're sitting on a cushion, we're towards the front third of the cushion, so our pelvis is opened up a little bit, and our legs are in a position that we find comfortable, either right in front of the left or crossed or even full lotus if we find that comfortable. So start at the top of your head and just work your way down. Check for any sources of tension or discomfort and address those now before we begin the actual meditation session so that they don't become a distraction over the next few minutes. Lots of times at this point, Geshe Gelik has us do the 9-round breathing. But I was just thinking we're probably going to have to stop doing that. We shouldn't be holding our nostrils closed with our fingers for a while. We may have to modify that. I don't think we're ready to glove up yet for our meditation sessions. So we'll just do 3 deep breaths from the abdomen. The stomach expanding on the in-breath, so our diaphragm is pulled down and our lungs are completely filled. And then the stomach contracts towards the spine on the out-breath. 3 deep, slow breaths like that. And now we allow our breath to return to its normal pattern. And we'll begin the actual meditation practice. Again, we're going to do the simple concentration on the breath, placing the mind, our awareness, on the physical sensation of the breath moving in and out through the openings of the nostrils. Just direct experience, direct tactile physical sensation. We're not thinking about it. We're not describing it to ourselves. We're not visualizing it. Just direct sensation, the mind and its ability to perceive the movement of the air. Mind on the breath so that there's no dualism. Mind and breath are of the same nature. And whenever our mind wanders off to some other subject, some other object of attraction, we just set that aside and gently come back to the breath. Not being harsh or judgmental with ourselves, but just acknowledging that we've gone away and we come back. Gone away and come back. Over and over and over again. And now we'll end our meditation session with a I realized I forgot to set our motivation at the beginning because I was thinking about other things. So we'll do a retroactive motivation / dedication. We can acknowledge that we've done something a little bit out of the unusual, something that, though small, has made an impression on our mind stream, a positive impression, just developing the ability to concentrate is a positive act, and that's what we're doing. And we think, may that positive imprint not be lost, but may it on my mental continuum in a way that in the future it will be of benefit to all living beings. Any questions about that meditation practice? Remember to wait for the mic if you want to make a comment as this is being sent out. Okay. Who kept their mind on their breath when the train went by? I'm not sure exactly what I mean, I have no idea what a Buddha's experience was, because at some level he would be aware of the train, but somehow his concentration would still be on the breath, so I'm not sure exactly how that pans out when you're enlightened. Anyway, just take a minute to introduce yourself to some other people in the room that you don't know. Remember, no handshaking, but you're allowed to smile or bump elbows or anything, since we do have some people who weren't here last week. Okay, let's come back in a group. Okay. We'll start with a little bit of a review of what we covered last week, both for the benefit of those who weren't here and for those of us who were here and have forgotten everything over the course of a week. This class is taking refuge in the three jewels. So let's make sure we've got our terms down straight. When we're talking about refuge as Buddhist or as potential Buddhist, or just because we want to learn about Buddhism, what specifically does refuge mean? Does anybody remember the definition? Or anybody write it down?
Putting safe direction in our lives with positivity.
You're good. You're close. Yeah, you got some of the right words.
Shelter, protection from distress.
Yeah. Okay. Specifically in Buddhism, when we talk about refuge, we're talking about putting, and this is a quote, this is not me, a safe and positive direction in our lives indicated by the three jewels, and pledging to maintain this steady direction unwaveringly until it brings us to liberation or nirvana, liberation, personal liberation from suffering, or enlightenment, i.e. Buddhahood, a state of complete compassion and wisdom. Okay, I think the important things are to remember are the first part, putting a safe and positive direction in our lives, indicated by the three jewels. Okay, so we're putting the safe and positive direction in our lives, but the three jewels are indicating the direction. Now, when we there is a formal refuge ceremony. Some people have mentioned that already. We'll talk about that in some of the later classes. That's going to be offered by Geshe Sampo in June. So there's the formal ceremony, but what we're talking about is a continuous state of taking refuge in the three jewels, putting this safe and positive direction in our life. Okay? So the next question is, what are the three jewels? Somebody want to tell me what the three jewels are? The Buddha, okay. I'm just going to abbreviate it. Dharma and Sangha, okay. And we talked last week about there's a conventional sense and an actual sense for each one of these. I don't think, this is just good to be familiar with. I don't think you really need to concentrate on remembering this, but it's good to be familiar with the idea. What's the conventional sense of the Buddha? Representation in statues, images, pictures, and books, okay? I'll just put statues, okay? And what's the actual Buddha that we take refuge in? Any enlightened being, yes, okay. Any or all enlightened beings. Well, I'll just put EBs. Okay? So we have representations of the jewel of the Buddha on the statue, but we're not worshiping those. We don't want to, there, I touched my eye again. At least I'm developing some awareness. This is tough. We don't want to become a statue on an altar, okay? I don't think that's what most of us aspire to. We want to become an enlightened being who can benefit all sentient beings, okay? The conventional Dharma is the books, the teachings, yeah, videos, all these modern types of technology, books, the teachings that we receive, going and sitting in the Kadampa and listening. And the actual Dharma is, yes, let's see, the realizations. Where are the realizations? Yeah, in the minds. Those on the path. Lots of times they use the word Arya. You don't need to worry about that too much. It's not Aryan. This is not neo-Nazism or anything. We talk about the Arya beings, which refers to the noble beings, okay, those on the path. Okay. Another word, this is a point of confusion. I'll just bring this up. This may clarify something for some people. You also hear the word arhat. Anybody know what an arhat is? Use the mic, yeah.
It's a practitioner that practices for their own peace and enlightenment as opposed to a Mahayana Buddhist.
Well, that's kind of technically it's someone who has a direct realization of emptiness, okay, which implies someone who has achieved liberation, okay. But that's not the same as an Arya being, okay. I just brought that up because people get those words confused. An arhat is an Arya being, but an Arya being isn't necessarily an arhat, okay. Conventional Sangha is No, that's Dharma, okay. Yeah, conventional Sangha. How many ordained people? Okay, 4 or more. Yeah, greater than or equal to 4 people in red robes. Okay, 4 ordained people. So we do have a conventional Sangha here at Kadampa Center because we have 3 nuns and 2 resident Geshis, okay? And what's the actual Sangha? The actual Sangha, yeah, is anyone who has achieved a direct perception of emptiness. So this is where arhats come up, okay? Not the same thing as the Arya beings here. Okay, that's the actual Sangha, okay? So not real important to remember all this, just good to be familiar with it. Definitely need to remember what the 3 jewels are, though. In addition to talking about the conventional and actual 3 jewels, we also talk about the, excuse me, let's see. Okay. Let me get my notes here. Okay. Okay, so we've got the 3 jewels. Got that down. We talk about refuge. Again, I'm going to just throw some stuff out there. Not super important to remember this, but just to be familiar with it. We talk about causal refuge. Causal and resultant refuge. Oops. Causal refuge. And we, again, this refers to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Okay? This is causal refuge in the Buddha. Taking causal refuge in the Buddha is looking to those beings who have already achieved enlightenment. Okay, for example, the historical Buddha. Resultant refuge, oops, I'm sorry. Is taking refuge in the Buddha that we ourselves will become. That's a potential for all of us. Okay? Causal refuge, taking refuge in the Buddhas, those who have already achieved enlightenment. Resultant refuge is taking refuge in the Buddha that we have the potential that we will become. Okay? Causal refuge in the where'd this go? Causal refuge in the Dharma, going to realizations in the minds of others. Okay, those who have achieved realizations. Resultant refuge is taking refuge in our own future realizations. The term realization is used a lot in Buddhism. It's when one of the teachings of the Buddha, such as impermanence, is so in your mind that it's just your natural way of thinking, that you always are aware of impermanence. So causal Dharma is going to the realizations in the minds of others. Resultant refuge in the Dharma is going to our own future realizations. So you can see the pattern. Causal is going to others, something outside ourselves, and resultant refuge is what we will ultimately experience inside ourselves. Causal refuge in the Sangha, that's turning towards the Arya beings, those who have realized emptiness, and resultant refuge is that taking refuge in the Arya that we ourselves will become. Okay? So not really very complicated. Just initially when we practice refuge, we're looking externally. Okay? We look to external Buddhas, enlightened beings, external dharma, the teaching, the realization of the teachings in the minds of others. External sangha, okay, those who have realized emptiness. And that leads to resultant refuge when we ultimately take refuge in our own realization of those qualities. Okay? So I think it's just good to be familiar with causal and resultant refuge. Any questions or comments about what I've said so far? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I always preface it with, pardon my ignorance.
Pardon my ignorance.
So the way that this is getting conceptualized is basically when we start taking refuge, it's an external process until it becomes internalized.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right.
We look to things out. We're beginners on the path, so we look to those who have progressed further than we have along the path. But ultimately, we bring it in. Yeah, and it's our own spiritual development that we finally take refuge in. I mean, a Buddha doesn't have to go to refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. He's an enlightened being, There's nothing they could teach him, nothing he could learn from them. He's all seeing, all knowing.
Yeah.
And that's a possibility for all of us.
Yeah, I kind of, I think about it in terms of support groups. You lean on them until you don't have to as much.
Uh-huh.
And then the other question I have is that in Buddhism, is there the idea that eventually everyone will be it's an eventuality, will all be enlightened?
That is a good question. Anybody know the answer to that one?
I say yes.
Because I don't know for sure, okay? That's where I'm supposed to say, oh, that's a good question for a guessy, yes. That's in some of the more esoteric teachings. I have heard, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, that everyone is on kind of eventual spiral upwards, okay? There's lots of ups and downs along the way, but there's a general movement in that direction. But don't quote me on that, okay?
So I'm studying I'm teaching my kids Fibonacci, pattern of spiral.
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, and then in Western philosophy it goes back to Spinoza and people like that. But, there are a finite number of consciousnesses in existence, in different realms. There are no new consciousnesses being created. So the gradual movement of those consciousnesses very slowly over time is moving upwards. Because once you become a Buddha, you're not going to fall down, okay? So even if just one person in every great eon achieves Buddhahood, the number of people who are not Buddhas is decreasing, the number of consciousnesses. Oh, go ahead, you can get one. Okay.
No, I mean,
Anybody else? Okay, yeah.
I actually have one from someone who was here last week. I don't think she's here this week. Asked about worshiping statues.
Yeah.
If you could speak to that a little bit, like why are we not worshiping them when we're, prostrating to them and things like that?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, it's very clear, we're not worshiping statues. We're not pretending that they're any more than metal and paint and whatever they are, but they are a very powerful image, an icon, whatever we want to call them, that if we allow our mind to respond to it in that way, it can make a very positive impression on our mind. It's kind of like softening our mind, planting some seeds there. But it's definitely not worshiping the statues, though we should take care of them as they are a representation of something that is extreme, if we've taken refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, something that is incredibly important to us. So we should respect them, not abuse the statues or desecrate them, but they're not, desecrate's not the right word, because they're not holy in and of themselves. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what more to say. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Okay. Okay.
Many questions that came from the others. So I can't help but go back to the only a finite finite number of consciousnesses
Yes.
in existence.
Mm-hmm. And each one is without beginning and without end. Okay?
Interesting. So, as the beginner that I am,
Yeah.
that is very hard for me to grasp.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, is the belief that sometime, somewhere in a different realm, I'll get it, and I'll have that comfort in knowing that I'm not just a bunch of brain cells, because that's what I think now.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be in a different realm. It could be in this life as a human being. I mean, the Buddha achieved enlightenment, isn't it? The form of a human being with a human mind. Is this the first module you've done, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
So maybe I'll get it later.
or you may have missed some. Yeah, where our consciousness can be, according to the Buddha, ATB, as we say, ATTB, according to the Buddha, can be reborn in different realms, both in animal realms, which we see, but also in realms that we don't see, suffering realms, very pleasant realms. So our consciousnesses, based on our karma, are moving in and out of these different realms. So it may look like the number of people is increasing, but those are consciousnesses that are coming into the human form from other realms. So there's no new consciousness being created, because each one is completely without beginning. You can't go back in time and find a point where it began. There was always a previous life form, and it continues without end, okay? But the number of consciousnesses, though huge, is not changing. And the possibility to become enlightened can happen in any realm, but it said the human realm is actually the best realm, because we can study and think and go to teachings. It said we have kind of the right mixture of enough suffering to be tired of it, but enough possibility, enough brain power to be able to get out of it. As opposed to a mosquito, it's very difficult to become enlightened if you're in the life of a mosquito, because all you think about is where's your next hit of blood going to come from. Okay. Yeah. Okay, one more. I'll give you one more, okay? You're about, no, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll ask this one. Emptiness. Just this little one. Right?
Yeah, okay.
So when you say direct experience with emptiness,
Yeah.
how does that relate? Like when you say that, I think how people describe near-death experiences, where they have this experience of being more expansive, one with everything, no separation. Is that analogous to emptiness?
Not really, no.
Okay, then.
Have you taken the death and dying module?
I tried. I really did.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You know, you do that dissolution meditation where what happens at the time of death is we lose our various senses and perceptions. But that's not really an experience of emptiness. Okay, when we talk about emptiness, it's a jargony term we use a lot around here, and it refers to the way things really exist. They're empty of any permanent, solid existence. Things don't exist the way we think they do. They're much more fluid, flexible, changing, okay? You know, I look at that cushion and my immediate reaction is that's a cushion now and it'll always be a cushion. You know, I know it's going to dissolve eventually, but it's actually doesn't even exist that way right now, okay? But we don't see that. That's, if we experience emptiness directly, we see the emptiness. We see the cushion, but we also see its emptiness at the same time. Yeah, okay? Okay, so this is important to remember. What are the causes of going for refuge in the Three Jewels? What motivates us to take refuge? Not just the formal ceremony, but to make it a spiritual practice of always going in the direction that the Three Jewels guide us in. Anybody remember this?
Was this from last week?
Yeah.
Fear of suffering.
Fear.
There's another F.
Yeah, the two
Faith.
F's.
Faith and confidence.
Okay, yeah. First one is fear. And the second one is faith. Okay? Both fairly loaded words that we don't like to use necessarily. In the classical teachings of the Buddha, he's talking specifically, and this is where previous modules come in, fear of what's referred to as a lower rebirth. Okay? Because when we get to this point in the Lam Rim, which is a series of topics that the Buddha gave us to work with, the graduated path, Lam, L-A-M, Rim, R-I-M. That's an organization of the Buddhist teachings in nice little segments. And Discovering Buddhism kind of follows those, but it's not perfectly set up that way. So when we get to the point of starting to talk about refuge, we've already dealt with the topic of rebirth or continuity of consciousness. Okay, we've kind of grappled with that to a certain degree, and we may not believe in it, we may not accept it, but at least we start to see that it's a possibility. That our consciousness, our mind, we can always find a previous moment of mind, all the way back to our childhood in this, and then the logical supposition is that there were previous moments, that the consciousness did not arise from the union of a sperm and egg. That's something physical. The consciousness is the non-physical part of our being, and that can be stretched back without end, okay, and it will continue in the future. So we have the consciousness that continues, that in different lives, so to speak, is associated with different bodies or different forms of being. Okay, right now we're in the human form, which is a temporary union of our consciousness with a human body. Okay, that's considered a higher rebirth. Does anybody know what the other higher rebirths are that our consciousness could possibly take?
It's one in the Pure Lands.
Well,
David.
God realm, and the demigods is another way of putting it. Okay, these are other so-called higher rebirths. The God realm is one of pure pleasure and enjoyment. Nothing bad ever happens. The demigods are, nice, but not as good as the God realm, and there's a little bit of envy in there. Human realm we're all familiar with. It's a mixture of good things and bad things, okay? Human realm is not all bad, but there are things in it that we don't like. These are considered higher rebirths. Why are they considered higher rebirths? Because this we can study the Dharma if we have one of these. It's easier to study the Dharma if we have one of these rebirths. Now the problem with the God realm is, it's so pleasurable there's no motivation really to study the Dharma, but it is a possibility. Demigods a little less so, and human realm said to be just right, not too hot, not too cold. This is the Goldilocks realm, okay? Lower rebirths. Animal realm, hungry ghost, and the hell realms, another loaded terms. These are considered lower rebirths. Why are they considered lower rebirths? Do these beings have less potential to become enlightened? It's harder to study the Dharma, okay, to have realizations in these realms. Not impossible, okay? There are all these stories of people, animals becoming enlightened, and hungry ghost is characterized by need. They're physically depicted as, having kwashiorkor, or the big stomachs, and very thin, very thin limbs. And then the hell realms are just pure suffering, different types of suffering, okay? Much harder to develop realizations of the Dharma in these realms. Not impossible, but harder. Okay, so these are considered lower rebirths, one we would prefer to avoid if we had a choice. But every consciousness in each one of these realms has an equal potential to become a Buddha. Every little insect, worm, mosquito has Buddha nature, the potential to become enlightened. Okay? Yeah, we got a question over here.
Yeah, so I've got two little questions and one bigger question. So the two little ones are that I read about the Preta realm or
Yeah,
the Nagas. Who are the Nagas? I mean,
Pretas are the hungry ghost, okay?
Okay.
Nagas are environmental spirits. They're not part of this qualification, yeah.
so the Nagas are not Buddhas.
No.
No, they're
Yeah.
like.
Don't
half-
ask me about Nagas, though. I don't know
Okay,
anything about them,
'cause
okay?
I don't either. All right. So the
all
Preta-
I remember is I tell the stories. Someone was having some sort of, I don't know how you'll react to it, some sort of physical problem, and they went to see Lama Zopa, our spiritual leader, and talked to him about it. And he kind of sat there and thought, and his response was, "Kaka on a naga. That's the cause of all your problems. You did kaka on a naga." Whether that was useful or not, I don't know.
Okay, so all we know is there's some sort of spiritual being,
Yeah, yeah.
but not Buddhas.
Right, yeah.
Okay. And then the other question I had is when you talked about consciousness being the non-physical part of ourselves, how does that relate to our use of the word conscious, like I am conscious now, but when I sleep in deep sleep, I'm not conscious?
Yeah.
How does that have any correlation to consciousness being present with us?
Consciousness is always present. It's continuous, okay? We never have a moment where there's no consciousness, okay? There are different levels, okay? There's a gross consciousness, which is what we're operating with most of the times now. Said when we're dreaming, we're actually experiencing a more subtle level of consciousness, okay? Sexual orgasm, we're said to experience a more subtle level of consciousness. Fainting, that moment of fainting is a more subtle level of consciousness. And then the most subtle is that pure white light consciousness that appears at the moment of death, okay? So there's always consciousness present, but we're experiencing at different levels.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the classical teaching is that we go for refuge because we're afraid of winding up in one of these lower realms. Okay? That may speak to us, it may not speak to us, okay? If we study the teachings and think about rebirth, and they go into great great detail about I shouldn't be laughing now, I'm just thinking of something else. Great detail about the types of suffering that you experience in these realms, both physical and mental suffering. I was laughing because I was thinking Don Brown, who started Kadampa Center, was very small. This is almost 30 years ago. He invited some high Lama, Tibetan Lama, to come and teach, and he left the subject of the topic that he's going to teach about up to the Lama. And so the people didn't have regular teachers here, so they came in and he taught for an entire weekend on the sufferings of the hell realms. I don't think any of the people ever came back, according to what Don said. Anyway, so if we accept the idea of the lower realms and we understand what they're like, we don't want to go there next time around. Okay? But if that doesn't speak to us, we can think about the problems of this life. Okay? I'm tired of it. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, as they say. If we just look at life in this body with this mind, we see problems, or as Geshe Geluk calls them complications. Why is this happening? This shouldn't happen. Okay, these things shouldn't happen. If we say, I want to avoid that, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about fear. Okay, it's not fear in a paralyzing sense. It's fear in the sense of what keeps us from stepping out in front of a speeding car. Okay, because we know that will cause complications. Okay, if we continue to live our life the way we have, it's going to cause problems. So instead of doing that, like I said last week, I think of this as informed knowledge about the consequences of our actions. if we continue to act the same way and make the same imprints on our mind stream, we realize that we're going to experience the same problems in the future. If we want to experience something different, we think about taking refuge, okay? I mean, this really doesn't say why we'd go to the 3 jewels. It's just saying we want something better, okay? So you can call it fear, you can call it knowledge, understanding. This is what we're talking about here, not fear in a sense that is paralyzing or makes us timid, but just not wanting to go on the way we've gone in the past. That's what we're talking about here. Okay, I just wanted to touch briefly here on the 4 Noble Truths. I think most of y'all probably know what they are. I just want to make sure you're familiar with this. What's the first Noble Truth? Life is suffering, or life is problems, okay? Number 1. Life is problems, okay? This is something we develop in meditation, an understanding that life is problematic. Things don't work out the way we want them to, okay? We suffer. Other beings suffer. The planet suffers. Life is problems, okay? Then, what's the second one? There's a more general term. There's a cause for those problems, yeah. And what's the cause? Attachment, yeah, and karma, okay? Karma and attachment, okay? Karma refers to the negative actions of body, speech, and mind. Attachment, cravings, other mental afflictions, as we call them, okay? The point being is that it's not just random. You know, it's not just we got unlucky, okay? But there are specific causes for the problems we're having. Okay, so if you just stop with number 1, you'd say, life sucks, then you die. Put that on your bumper, okay? Second one, little bit, we're starting to see some light here, okay? There are causes. If something has a cause, then we may be able to fix it. We can remove the cause, okay? What's the third? Yeah, or there's an end to problems, even more optimistic than that. That is possible to end our problems, not just diminish them, not just make them more tolerable, not just cope, but completely remove all suffering, all problems, all complications from our life. And the 4th Noble Truth is, yeah, there's a path. Yeah, in different levels of Buddhism, it's taught in different ways, but there's a path. The path as shown by the 3 jewels, okay? The path of taking Buddhist refuge, okay? So the first cause of going for refuge is really getting clear on this, that life is problematic. If we don't have any sense of that, there's no urge to go to refuge, okay? So, I think most people at some level, that's just the 4 Noble Truths, very basic Buddhism, have a sense of that. And the Buddhist, so we go for refuge. He says, look at your life. What have you gone for refuge until now? And that's where his teaching, this is a very interesting teaching on what's called the 8 worldly dharmas, comes in. He's saying, if you look at your life so far, when you have problems or when you want to make your life better, you typically go to these. You take refuge in these. What's the meaning of the word dharma? No, more specific teaching. What's the word actually mean? That's the way we use it as teaching. But no. Something that separates us from suffering. Okay? A dharma is that which separates us from suffering. So he is being a little bit snarky here. Okay? He's saying the 8 worldly dharmas are what you really turn to. And they're not that reliable. They're not most of you have tried them to some degree and they don't work. Does anybody remember what some of these are? I'm going to list the things over here that we want more of. Anybody remember these? One is pleasure. One is gain. One is praise. And another is fame. Okay. If our life is problematic, if things aren't working out, typically, and this doesn't apply to everybody, you need to look at your own experience, we say, I need more pleasurable experiences. I need to go on better vacations. That's going to make me happy. And I need to go with the right people and eat in the right restaurants and hang out on the right beaches, okay? Need to gain, yeah. Particularly when the stock market is crashing like it is. I've got to gain. I need more. I need a better house. I need nicer things in the house. I need more money in my retirement account. I need a better salary, okay? Praise. I don't like people criticizing me. I like people to think that I'm a good person. I really want to impress people with how good I am, okay? And then I want to be well known in the community. I want to have a good reputation. I want people to think I'm kind and generous. Okay, so these are things that we typically go for. We say we need more of when life isn't working out. So we want more pleasure. We want less pain, okay? We attach, we crave this, we push this away. We want more gain, we want less loss. We want less blame. We hate it when people blame us, particularly when we're innocent. That is they say that's a really good time to look at your false sense of self. It's when someone blames you for something that you know you didn't do. The sense of I that arises in that is really strong. And we don't like to be disgraced. Okay? Okay. We want as much of these as we can. We want as little of these as we can. What's the flaw in that philosophy? Well, there are a lot of flaws, but what's one? You're always grasping. Yeah, you're grasping. Okay. Can you live a life without any of these? Is that possible as a human being to get completely rid of those in this lifetime? Not possible. Okay. And the more we're attached to these, the more we push those others away. So that when we actually experience pain, it's actually 10 times pain. It's not just pain, but it's pain that I do not want and I don't deserve. And it's not fair. And why did this happen to me? Okay? So we're on this going back and forth between these two, trying to get this, pushing that away, on and on and on. This is interesting. Which one do you think Lama Zopa said was the most powerful of these 4 pairs for most people? For some people, but he actually said praise and blame is the strongest motivator for most people. I know we all have to look at ourselves. We're all in different places, but this means having your partner really think you're a good person. That's a powerful motivating force, and trying to not have them see you as a bad person. Your family, you want your family to like you. Okay? So these are the 8 worldly dharmas. We think they're going to separate us from suffering, but the Buddha says if you look seriously at them, they're worldly. They're not reliable. They're not reliable places of refuge. Okay? They're not enough to get you where you want to go. They're not going to get you to the state of either nirvana, liberation from suffering, or enlightenment, state of compassion and wisdom that's known as Buddhahood. So he's being a little bit cynical when he calls them dharmas, because they're not really dharma in the sense that they don't truly separate us from suffering. We think that they will. We all think the more pleasure we have, the less suffering we're going to have. But if we're attached, as you say, to pleasure, even in the moment of experiencing it, there is something off if we're willing to look closely at our mind. Any questions or comments about this or anything else I've mentioned? Yeah, let's see, do you have the mic, Linda?
So when you gave examples of gain versus loss, most of the examples, if not all of them, were material gain, which is completely understandable. But when I think of loss, I think of losing a loved one or a child especially. Is that the same kind of dharma in gain and loss?
Yeah, I think that would fall into that category. Yeah, losing a person, that's even more something we want to push away. We don't want that to happen to us for very valid reasons, but just by pushing things away, we can't end our own problems. In that trying to avoid that is not going to free us from suffering. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. So, fear, understanding, informed knowledge about the consequences of our action. We've spent a lot of our life going to the 8 worldly dharmas for refuge. The Buddha's saying they may work temporarily, but they're not permanent, valid sources of refuge. Okay? I don't know if it... And then next week we're going to talk about faith, the second cause of going for refuge, what that involves. Because we're not talking about blind faith there either. We're talking about informed knowledge that there is a place that we've checked out, that we're familiar with, that we know is a valid source of refuge. The image I gave last week was being in a field and we see an enormous thunderstorm with lightning coming up. We want to get out of it. That's the fear. But if we don't know where to go, if we don't know that there's a safe building on the other side of the hill that we're familiar with and know it's solid and it's got a lightning rod and it's not going to be struck, if we know that that building's there, then we head in that direction. Okay? We're afraid of the lightning for very valid reasons. That fear is not a negative quality. We know what it can do. We want to get out of it. We want to go to a safe place. We know that there's one on the other side of the hill. So next week we'll talk about what this quality of faith, what faith really means in terms of Buddhism, what we're talking about. It's not blind faith. It's a very informed kind of faith. Okay? Any questions or comments before we do our meditation to finish up? Okay. So we'll do another meditation, and I will remember to set our motivation for this one. Okay. Let me just check and see if there's anything else I wanted to mention tonight. Yeah, I think that does it. Yeah, next week we'll talk about faith. Okay, great. Okay. We'll begin our meditation by checking our posture. I think you're familiar with it now, so I'm not going to run through that. Just check it. Make sure there's no sources of tension or discomfort. Address those now. Three deep breaths from the abdomen, stomach expanding on the in-breath. And we allow our breathing to return to its normal pattern. And we begin this meditation by setting our motivation. And as much as possible, we try to generate the bodhicitta motivation, the most powerful motivation of all. The thought that everything I do, even this simple meditation for the next few minutes, is done with the idea that I'm developing my mind, my powers of wisdom and compassion, in order to be of benefit to others. So 2 parts of the thought. I'm doing this meditation to develop my mind and ultimately become enlightened so that I can benefit others. That's not the way we normally think. So we may have to kind of force it out, but that's okay. And having set our motivation, we begin with a couple minutes of mind on the breath. Nothing more, nothing less than that. Mind always coming back to the breath, the movement of the air in and out through our nostrils. And now that our mind is a little bit calmer, a little bit more focused, first we're going to do just a simple review meditation on the 8 worldly dharmas. Just making sure that they're fixed in our mind. And it's fine to look at the board if you want to remember them. We're talking about pain, pleasure, and pain. Gain and loss, praise, blame, fame, disgrace. So just review those. Try to get some clarity on what is meant by each one, and make sure that those 8 dharmas, worldly dharmas, are clear in your mind. This is what's called a review meditation, reviewing the material. Sometimes called a glance meditation. And now, being familiar with those terms, let's look at our own life. Which of those 8, either attachment to the 4 on the left or avoidance of the 4 on the right, which of those have been our habitual refuge in the past? The answer will be different for each of us. What have we been most attached to, or most attached to avoiding? To having one, not having the other? Which ones have been particularly strong in our lives? And having identified which ones have been powerful or attractive for us, let's take a moment and look at that refuge critically. Was it truly Dharma? Did it really separate me from suffering? Did it satisfy my expectations? Did it make me happy? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just think critically, analyzing your own experience. And now we can end our meditation with a brief dedication, acknowledging that we've done something positive, that thinking critically about our experience in this way is a virtuous action, and it makes a positive imprint on our mind stream that one day will ripen in a way that benefits others. One last brief quote. We should go for refuge to our own future Buddha, future Dharma, and future Sangha. That's what real refuge is. We may not be at that stage yet, and we turn to the externals, but ultimately it's our own future Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that we're taking refuge in, our own potential that exists in each of us to achieve enlightenment. Okay, any questions or comments before we break up? There's homework. Linda has that.
The homework's outside the the Gampa door, and last week's handouts are out there as well.
Okay. And next week we'll be talking about faith. What does that mean in a non-theistic religious system such as Buddhism? And then we'll be talking about the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that make them objects of refuge. Okay. So drive carefully and see you all next week. Thank you.